Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar today to cover some tips and tricks to prepare your organization for a CMMC Level 2 certification. By way of introductions, my name is Jay Trinckes, and I'm the Director of GRC Services here at Elevate Consult. I've spent more than 2 decades in cybersecurity, privacy, compliance, and now AI, working across healthcare, finance, government, and technology. I've even written several books on the topic, with my most recent publication, The Definitive Guide to Responsible AI, released back in January of this year. I hold an alphabet soup worth of certifications, including the Lead CCA designation, permitting me to perform full CMMC certifications under C3PAO. However, I've been primarily working with clients on the readiness processes. Thus, the name for our session, From the Field. Everything I'm going to share with you is based on what I actually see happen during real assessments with real organizations right now. A couple of other items about me is that I was a former adjunct professor at a local college and a former law enforcement officer here in the state of Florida. So I bring a very practical, field-tested perspective to everything I do. Here's what we're going to cover today. First, we're going to provide some background on CMMC to level set everyone along with discussing the scope of your environment. Scoping is one of the most important tasks to complete as part of your CMMC assessment. Second, we are going to talk about evidence. Specifically, what makes evidence adequate and sufficient in the eyes of an assessor. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of the entire process, and getting it wrong can cost you a certification. Third, I'm going to walk you through real-world examples, not hypotheticals, actual scenarios I've seen in the field, and how organizations worked through them. Hopefully, this information will resonate with you and help with prepping your organization. Next, we're going to talk about tips and tricks for getting to the perfect 110 SPRS score. I'll also be covering some things that could get you in serious legal trouble if you don't get them right. We'll touch on a topic of AI that is sometimes overlooked when it comes to a CMMC assessment. Finally, we'll discuss some different approaches an organization can take to get that perfect 110 score. We have a lot to cover, so let's get into it. Before we dive into the practical content, I want to make sure everyone has the same baseline understanding of what CMMC is and why it matters right now. Here's another that puts things in perspective. There are an estimated 220,000 companies in the United States that process, store, or transmit controlled unclassified information, what we call CUI, or Federal Contract Information, FCI, in support of the defense industrial base. These are organizations that have Department of War, DOW, Department of Defense, DOD, contracts. They are either prime contractors or subcontractors to primes. They might be small manufacturers, IT firms, engineering shops, or companies that in many cases have never had to think about formal cybersecurity certification before. And all of them, along with their own subcontractors, are now required to prove that they're safeguarding this sensitive information. Not just say they are. Prove it. That's a massive shift. And the mechanism that is making it happen is called the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program, or CMMC. The CMMC model is built around 3 levels of increasing rigor. Level 1 is focused on Federal Contract Information, or FCI. It covers 15 basic safeguards. Think of it as the baseline. If you have a DOD contract and you handle FCI, this is your floor. Level 2 is where most organizations need to be focused today. It addresses Controlled Unclassified Information, or CUI, with 110 security requirements mapped directly to NIST SP 800-171 Revision 2. This is what we're going to spend most of our time on today. Level 3 adds a set of enhancements that bring the total to 134 control practices. This is for organizations working on the most sensitive programs dealing with advanced persistent threats. One thing I want you to note here, and this matters a lot, is that these control practices are broken down further into what we call assessment objectives. Those assessment objectives are what the assessor is actually testing against, not just a high-level practice, the individual objectives underneath it. I'll show you exactly what that looks like when we get into the examples. The CMMC model currently covers 14 domains, which are the control families from NIST SP 853 Revision 5, all mapped back to NIST SP 800-171. Now let's talk about scope. This is where most organizations start making mistakes. And if you get scope wrong, everything downstream is going to be wrong too. In law enforcement, this was known as the fruit of the poisonous trees. Any work being performed on the wrong scope will inadvertently become null and void once the correct scope has been identified. Before you can define your assessment scope, you have to understand what you're actually trying to protect. So let's define CUI. CUI is information the government creates or possesses, or that an entity creates or possesses on behalf of the government. That requires safeguarding or dissemination controls under law, regulation, or government-wide policy. There are two main categories: CUI Basic, where the authority requires protection but doesn't specifically or exactly how that is protected, and CUI Specified, where specific controls are called out. One type of CUI that comes up frequently in defense contracting is Controlled Technical Information, or CTI. This is technical information with military or space application, engineering drawings, specs, computer software with source code, technical reports. If your organization creates or handles any of that in support of a DoW or DoD contract, that's CUI. The question you need to answer before anything else is, where does CUI flow in my organization? Which systems touch it? Which people access it? Which devices carry it? The answer defines your assessment boundary. Once you know where CUI flows, you need to categorize every asset that exists in or around that environment. CMMC recognizes 4 categories of assets that we'll cover over the next few slides, starting with CUI assets. CUI assets are assets that directly process, store, or transmit CUI. These are fully in scope and assessed against all applicable CMMC practices. Next up are specialized assets. These include things like operational technology, or OT systems, which are hardware-software systems that detect or cause physical changes by monitoring, controlling industrial equipment, for example. Internet of Things, or IoT devices, that are embedded with sensors and collect or exchange data over the internet with cloud systems, and other machines, of course, without direct human interaction. Test equipment and specific government-furnished equipment, or GFE, which is property owned by the government or may be provided by a contractor to perform specific contracts in producing an end product. These assets may or may not touch CUI, and they may qualify for enduring exceptions under certain conditions. I'll talk more about this when we get into the tips section of our presentation. Next up is security protection assets. These are systems that provide security functions such as firewalls, log aggregators, or identity providers. They protect the CUI environment, but don't necessarily store CUI themselves. Security protection assets store or process security protection data. This is security relevant information and includes, but is not limited to, configuration data required to operate a security protection asset, log files generated by or ingested by a security protection asset, data related to the configuration or vulnerability status of in-scope assets, and passwords that grant access to in-scope environments. Finally, contractor risk managed assets. These are systems capable of touching CUI, but controlled by policy and practices so that they don't. Contractor risk managed assets are not required to be physically or logically separated from an in-scope environment, since they are not supposed to be processing CUI in the first place. An example may be a personal laptop that has been locked down and restricted through policy and technical means from accessing any CUI. So why does categorize your assets, and why does this matter? Because proper asset categorization directly affects your scope. And a well-defined scope means fewer systems to assess, lower cost, less risk, and a cleaner path to certification. Getting this right is one of the highest leverage things you can do early in the process. You need data flow diagrams, a complete asset inventory, and all of it tied together in your system security plan. Speaking of which, the System Security Plan, or SSP, is a foundational document of your entire CMMC assessment. The SSP is the first thing an assessor is going to ask for. It sets the context for everything that follows. The SSP must include a description of your assessment boundary, your certification boundary, a system boundary description, the environment of operations, physical, logical, and cloud, your identified and approved security requirements, how those requirements are implemented, your connections to other systems and networks, and a defined frequency for updates, which should be at least annually. Beyond those requirements, a solid SSP also includes a general system description, your defense in-depth philosophy, and a clear breakdown of roles and responsibilities, who owns what, who's authorized to access what, and who the authorizing officials are. Here's something people often miss. The SSP itself may be CUI. Specifically, it may qualify as controlled technical information. IP addresses, configurations, system diagrams, architecture details. These are sensitive. You need to manage and protect your SSP the same way you manage CUI. That includes making sure any cloud-based GRC tool you use to store it is FedRAMP moderate or authorized certified. We'll discuss the FedRAMP moderate equivalency nuance in a little bit. SB 818 is a guide for developing security plans for federal information systems. It's a good reference to read if you want more information on writing your SSP. Although this is not a federal requirement, it is one of the best references available for what a complete SSP looks like. One of the biggest blockers I see assessments is the classification of external service providers. Let me make this simple. An external service provider, or ESP, is any external entity that provides IT or cybersecurity services on your behalf, where CUI or security protection data flows through your systems. That includes managed service providers, co-located data centers, hosting providers, and managed security services. A cloud service provider, or CSP, is a specific type of ESP that delivers services via cloud computing. Here's the key rule. If CUI or security protection data, that includes log data, configuration data, anything that protects your CUI environment, flows through an ESP's assets, the ESP is in scope. And that ESP may need to be CMMC Level 2 certified themselves, or in the case of a CSP, they need to be FedRAMP moderate, authorized, certified, or what they call equivalent. If you don't get anything else out of this presentation, I strongly suggest you make a copy of this flowchart. It will definitely come in handy as you attempt to determine your ESPs and CSPs. This catches a lot of organizations off guard. They assume their MSP is handling compliance on their behalf, but the CMMC program doesn't allow you to delegate accountability. You need to know exactly what your service providers can and cannot do, and you need documentation of those responsibilities, which brings me to the Customer Responsibility Matrix, which I'll cover in this tips section. Note, FedRAMP authorization had a recent name change to FedRAMP certification. In addition, FedRAMP moderate is now classified as Class C. There's still some outstanding questions regarding the changes occurring under the FedRAMP program, and more specifically, if the new FedRAMP 20X will meet the equivalency standards set out under the CMMC program or not. This will be a discussion for another time. Now let's talk about the assessment itself, and specifically the part that most organizations are least prepared for, evidence. The CMMC assessment guide is designed to standardize how assessments are conducted. The goal is that two different assessors can walk into the same organization and reach the same conclusion based on the same evidence provided. That's a high bar, and it's intentional. Assessors use these three methods to come up with their conclusions: examine, interview, and test. Examine means reviewing the documentation, your policies, your procedures, your configurations, your screenshots, your logs. Anything written or recorded that demonstrates the control is in place. Interviews means talking to your people. The assessor is going to ask your IT team, your security officer, your system administrators questions about how they actually do their jobs. What matters here is that what your staff says aligns with what your documentation says. If your policy says one thing and your team does another, that's a finding. And test means the assessor is going to verify things technically. They'll look at your actual system configurations, have you run commands or perform walkthroughs, pull logs, and check access control lists as examples. The result of each assessment objective is either met, or not applicable. To achieve certification, you need met on all assessment objectives for a given practice. A not met may generate a POAM, or plan of action and milestones, but this can only be used for a select group of practices. All other practices require full implementation. The primary deliverable of an assessment is a compliance score and accompanying report that contains the findings associated with each requirement. This is a slide I want everyone to take a screenshot of. Write these two words down: adequate and sufficient. Evidence must pass both tests to satisfy an assessor. Adequate means the evidence is the right type of type for the control. If the control is about password complexity and you hand me a screenshot of your antivirus dashboard, that is not adequate. It's not the right evidence. Adequate evidence directly demonstrates performance of the specific practice being assessed. Sufficient means there's enough of it. Sufficient evidence covers all the samples the assessor needs to see, covers the full model scope. Not just one system, not just one department, and corresponds to the evidence collection approach defined in the assessment guide. Think of it this way. Adequate answers the question, is this evidence relevant? And sufficient answers the question, is there enough of it? You need both. One without the other won't get you a Met status. Let me show you exactly how this plays out in practice. I'm going to walk you through 3 real scenarios, and for each one I'm going to tell you what the control requires, what the assessment objectives are, and what evidence you actually need to produce. First example, authorized access control. This is practice AC 3.1.1. The requirement is simple to state. Limit system access to authorized users, processes acting on behalf of authorized users, and devices. But look at what the assessment objective actually require. There are 6 of them. Authorized users are identified. Processes acting on behalf of those users are identified. Authorized devices are identified. And then access is actually limited in the system for users, for processes, and for devices. Here's a common scenario. A user wants to access your CUI Enclave using a company laptop. What does the assessor need to see? Well, they need a list of authorized users who has been approved to access the CUI. That list might also include service accounts, which are processes acting on behalf of users. They need a list of authorized devices assigned to the users. And then they want to see the technical controls, the access control lists, the folder permissions, the role-based access settings that actually enforce the restriction. Finally, they'll check that only authorized devices can even reach your CUI systems. This is 6 distinct things you need to have documented and demonstrable. Not 1, 6. If you can only show 4, you have a gap. Example 2 goes hand in hand with the first, user accountability, AU 3.3.2. The requirement is to ensure the actions of individual system users can be uniquely traced back to those users, or accountability. The scenario builds on what we just covered. You've controlled access. Now you need to prove you can trace activity. Your system needs to capture user IDs, source and destination addresses, timestamps, and the activities performed. The assessor is going to ask you, where are your logs? Do you have access to them right now? Can you produce them? And when you produce them, do they actually contain the fields they're supposed to? Here's a practical tip. Know your log systems before the assessment. Know who has access to them. Know how long logs are retained. And run a sample pool before the assessor asks for one. If you can't find your own logs during an assessment, that's a very bad luck. Third example, password complexity. This is IA 3.5.7. The requirement here is to enforce minimum password complexity and character changes when new passwords are created. For assessment objectives, however, complexity requirements are defined. The character change requirements are defined. Complexity is enforced when passwords are created, and character change requirements are enforced. Here's the common failure. The policy says one thing, and the system is configured differently. Management improves a password policy that requires uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and special characters, but no one ever actually configured the system to enforce it. The assessor pulls the password configuration settings from your systems and compares them to your policy. If they don't match, that's a finding. Now, a note on where this is heading. A memo was issued in April of 2025 addressing NIST 800-171 Revision 3. CMMC currently tests against Revision 2, not 3. But you should be thinking ahead. Revision 3 requires a minimum of 16 characters, remembers the last 10 passwords, and requires cryptographic protection using salted one-way hashes. Start future-proofing your policies and configurations now so you're not scrambling later, but make sure you address the current Revision 2 requirements to meet CMMC standards. Now I want to get into the tips, and I want to be direct with you. Some of what I'm about to share isn't just about getting certified, it's about protecting your organization from serious legal exposure. Tip number 1, understand the False Claims Act and take it seriously. When your affirming official signs off on your SPRS score as a condition of receiving a DOW or DOD contract, they are making a legal representation to the federal government. If that score doesn't accurately reflect your compliance posture, you are exposed. The Department of Justice recovered $6.8 billion under the False Claims Act in 2025 alone. There were over 1,200 new whistleblower lawsuits filed in the last 12 months. That's about 100 per month. And whistleblowers can collect up to 30% of what the government recovers, which makes this a very attractive incentive for anyone inside your organization who thinks you're misrepresenting your compliance status. Here's the part that catches people off guard. The standard is not intended to defraud. The standard is knew or should have known. If you entered an SPR score with proper expert guidance without actually validating what your controls are fully implemented, the government can argue you should have known better. Real cases. Georgia Tech settled for $875,000 after failing to implement antivirus and maintain an SSP. Penn State paid $1.25 million for misrepresenting implementation dates and submitting inaccurate SPRS scores. Health Net Federal Services paid $11.2 million for falsely certifying cybersecurity compliance. The pattern is clear. These are not edge cases. If you want to make sure your SPRS score is accurate and defensible, that's exactly what we do at Elevate. We can assess your posture, document it correctly, and give you something you can stand behind. Tip 2, get your system security plan right. And don't overlook the fact that your SSP itself may be classified as control technical information. We've already talked about what an SSP needs to contain, but I want to reinforce why accuracy matters beyond just checking boxes. The SSP is the document that assessor uses to understand your entire environment. If the SSP is incomplete, inconsistent, or doesn't match what your systems are actually doing, every finding that follows is harder to defend. Your system security plan must include a description of the assessment boundary and CMM certification boundary, your system boundary description. This will be a high-level description of the components within the system boundary. Your description of the environment of operation. Physical surroundings in which an environment information system processes or stores and transmits information. Identified and approved security requirements. These are requirements levied on an information system that are derived from applicable laws, executive orders, directives, policy, standards, instructions, regulations, procedures, or organizational mission or business case. Needs to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the information being processed, stored, or transmitted. An implementation method for security requirements. This will be a description of how the identified and approved security requirements are implemented with the system or environment. Connections and relationships to other systems and networks. This is a description of related, dependent, and interconnected systems. And defined frequency of updates. As mentioned before, this is typically at least annually. In addition, your SSP very often may include the following. General information system description. This is your technical and functional description. Design philosophies. This is your defense in depth strategies and allowed interfaces and network protocols. And roles and responsibilities. This will be a description of the roles and responsibilities for key personnel, which may include the system owner, system custodian, authorizing official, and other stakeholders. The diagram in your SSP should match the narrative. The narrative should match the control descriptions, and the control descriptions should tell the assessor exactly where to look in your policies and procedures to verify compliance. Make it easy for the assessor to find the evidence. Don't make them search. And that consideration I mentioned. Your SSP contains IP addresses, configurations, system diagrams. Potentially, all of it qualifies as security protection data. In addition, your SSP may contain other CUI. That means the SSP needs to be handled, stored, and shared with the same control you apply to CUI. If you're storing it in a cloud GRC tool, that tool needs to be FedRAMP moderate, authorized, certified. You may also want to ensure your SSP speaks to FedRAMP certification versus authorization, and reflect guidance to Class C equivalency due to the changes FedRAMP has made. We are still awaiting the DOD guidance on these changes. Make sure to check your tools before your assessment. Tip 3. Know the difference between a POAM and an operational plan of action. They are not interchangeable, and confusing them will create problems. A plan of action and milestones, or POAM, is a formal document that identifies tasks that need to be completed, the resources required, the milestones, and the scheduled completion dates. Under CMMC, POAM items have a 180-day deadline, and here's the critical detail. Not every control is eligible for a POAM. Only a select group of controls can have open POAM items and still result in a conditional certification. All other controls must be fully implemented. You need a minimum score of 88 to even qualify for a conditional status. An operational plan of action is different. It's used for security requirement CA 3.12.2, and it addresses temporary vulnerabilities and deficiencies, things that are feasible to fix but may take time due to system dependencies or vendor patches. The OPA is used for controls that have been implemented but may fall out of compliance, such as a patch not being available. Doesn't have a defined remediation timeline either. A real example, your system requires FIPS validated cryptography. This refers to cryptography modules that have been independently tested and certified by the NIST Cryptographic Module Validation Program, or CMVP. You may have heard of standards like FIPS 140-2 or FIPS 140-3, for instance. Let's say the patch that brings you into compliance with the latest FIPS standard hasn't been validated yet. That's a temporary deficiency. It goes in an operational plan of action, not a POAM. Knowing which document applies to which situation keeps your assessment clean and keeps you from losing points you don't need to lose. Tip 4. If you use external service providers or cloud service providers, you need a customer responsibility matrix, sometimes called a shared responsibility matrix. Your ESP or CSP should provide this document. It defines which CMMC controls they are responsible for and which ones fall to you. The assessor is going to take that matrix and compare it against your SSP. If your SSP doesn't account for the controls that are your responsibility under the CRM, that's a gap, and gaps are findings. I also want to flag something that happened in 2025 that everyone in this space should be aware of. Recently, a prominent managed service provider that operated as a CMMC compliant Enclave abruptly ceased operations, apparently firing their staff and shutting down without notifying their clients. Organizations that had built their CMMC compliance on top of that Enclave woke up one day to find their compliance infrastructure gone. The lesson: choose your service providers carefully. Ask hard questions about their stability, their own compliance posture, and what your contractual protections are if they go under. Be careful in building your compliance on a foundation you don't control. Here's an example of how a customer responsibility matrix, or CRM, works. You'll note that the domain families that are assessed along with the practice requirements. For each practice requirement, your ESP or CSP should provide you with what controls they cover and what ones are your responsibility. Some of these practices may also be shared where both parties maintain some responsibility over the control. After determining responsibilities, anything that is your responsibility needs to be addressed and identified within your SSP. Any gaps should be promptly remediated. Tip 5. Understand enduring exceptions and use them where they legitimately apply. An enduring exception is a special circumstance where full CMMC compliance is generally not feasible. Examples may include operational technology systems, IoT devices, medical devices, test equipment that needs to replicate a fielded configuration, and government furnished equipment. Here's why this matters. If an asset qualifies as an enduring exception, such as a specialized asset or government furnished equipment, it may only get assessed against one practice. That'll be CA 3.12.4. instead of all 110. That's a significant scope reduction, but it only applies if you've properly categorized the asset and documented this exception in your SSP. This is not a loophole. It's a legitimate accommodation for assets where remediation isn't technically feasible. Don't misuse it. The assessor will know. But where it generally applies, use it. It could be a useful tool for managing scope in complex environments. Don't confuse this with a temporary deficiency, however, which is a condition where the fix exists and is in the process but just hasn't been completed yet. Those go in an operational plan of action with a known resolution path. Tip 6. Key resources you'll want to keep track of. Bookmark these 2 links and check them regularly. The first is the resource documentation page maintained by the Chief Information Officer of the Department of War, Defense. This is the official source for CMMC program guidance, scoping guidance, assessment guidance, and all briefings and memos. If something changes in the CMMC program and things are changing, this is where it's announced. The second is the Cyber Engagement Forum run by the Cyber AB. This is where the Book of Knowledge will be published along with practitioner level guidance, Q&As, and updates relevant to assessors and organizations alike. These are not optional reading. If you're a CMMC practitioner or an organization working towards certification, you need to know what's on these pages. The other two resources on this page that you'll want to be very familiar with are the NIST SSP 818 Guide to Developing Security Plans. This guide will help you more accurately complete your SSP. NIST SP 800-171A is the assessment methodology guidance your assessor will follow when evaluating your environment. The CMMC program is evolving, but achieving CMMC compliance is possible through the right preparation, scoping accurately, drafting a comprehensive SSP, properly categorizing assets, and documenting the 110 practices with evidence. Before I get to the summary, I want to spend a few minutes on something that's starting to come up in assessments, and I want to be upfront. This area is still developing, and that's AI. The regulatory guidance isn't fully finalized yet, but what I can tell you is what I'm actually seeing in the field right now, because that's more useful to you than telling you what a memo says. AI tools are everywhere in defense contracting environments. I don't mean theoretical AI. I mean the tools your engineers are using on their laptops right now. Copilot, ChatGPT, AI-assisted code editors, browser extensions with AI features, cloud platforms with AI baked in. And the number one finding I'm starting to see, and that other assessors are talking about, is that organizations have no idea what AI tools are running in their environment. They haven't inventoried them. They haven't assessed whether any of them touch CUI, and they haven't documented any of it in their SSP. When an assessor asks, what AI tools are in use in your organization? And they will start asking this, you need to be able to answer that question completely, not partially. Not, I think it's just Copilot. Completely. Here's where I want to be really direct with you, because this is the gap I see most often. It's not that organizations are deliberately putting AI tools in their CUI environment without thinking about it. It's that employees are doing it on their own and the organization doesn't know. Someone posts or pastes a section of a sensitive document into ChatGPT to get a summary. Someone uses a browser extension that has AI features to help write an email. Someone uses a free AI coding tool to help write a script that runs on a system that's in scope. None of that shows up in the SSP. None of it has been assessed. And when the assessor comes in and starts asking about AI tool usage or starts noticing AI generated patterns in documentation, the organization is caught flat-footed. This is what we call shadow AI, and it's the number one AI related compliance gap I expect assessors to focus on as this space matures. The fix is not complicated. It requires three things: a clear acceptable use policy that tells your people exactly what AI tools are approved and what data can and cannot go into them. Technical controls that prevent unauthorized AI usage, the DLP, data loss prevention tools, browser restrictions, network monitoring, and a culture of reporting where people know they can flag if they accidentally put something sensitive into an AI tool without being punished for it. If you find out about an incident through a user reporting it, you can respond. If you find out about it because an assessor found it, you're already in a much harder position. Let me tell you where this is heading because I think it's important context. The National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2026, specifically Section 1513, directs the Department of War, Defense, to develop a formal AI security framework and incorporate it into CMMC and the DFARS. The DOD is required to provide a status update to Congress by June 16, 2026, which is when we'll have more clarity on implementation timelines and what specific AI controls will be required. What that means practically, the framework isn't fully finalized yet. There's no specific AI compliance deadline today beyond what existing CMMC scoping rules already require. But here's the thing, and this is the field perspective I want to leave you with. The foundational work is the same regardless of when the framework is formalized. Inventory your AI tools, update your SSP, train your people, establish governance, make sure your service providers are using compliant tools. Organizations that do that work now are not going to be scrambling when the June status update comes out and enforcement timelines are announced. Organizations that wait are going to be facing a remediation cycle on top of everything else they already have to manage for CMMC. We published 2 articles on this topic on the Elevate website in March 2026 if you want to go deeper on the regulatory detail. I'll share the links in the follow-up email, but the message I want you to take from this session is simple. AI in your CMMC environment is not a future problem. It's a now problem. And the good news is that the way you approach it is exactly the same way you approach everything else in CMMC. Know your scope, document your controls, and make sure your people can defend them. The rule hasn't changed. If it touches CUI, it's in scope. AI doesn't get a special exemption from that. Let me give you 3 scenarios I want you to think of through for your own environment. Scenario 1. Your organization uses an AI-powered platform to analyze technical documents that contain CUI. That platform is in scope. It needs to be in your SSP. It needs to meet the applicable NIST 800-171 controls. And if it's cloud-based, it needs to be FedRAMP moderate authorized, now certified, or it doesn't belong anywhere near that data. Scenario 2. Your team used an AI to help draft your system security plan or your security policies. This one is subtle but important. If your people didn't write those documents themselves, they may not know what's in them. And when I sit down to interview your team and I ask them about a control that's described in their SSP and they give me an answer that doesn't match what the document says, that's a finding. AI can assist with the documentation, but your people have to own it and be able to speak to it. Scenario 3. Your managed service provider is using AI tools to manage your environment, log analysis, threat detection, configuration management. Some of this is now AI assisted. If their AI tools are processing your security protection data, your log data, your configuration data, those tools are in scope, and they need to be accounted for in your customer responsibility matrix. Bottom line, the same scoping logic we talked about earlier applies here. Ask the question, does this AI tool process, store, or transmit CUI or security protection data? If yes, it's in scope. Let me bring it all together. We started with scope. If you don't know where your CUI is, you can't protect it, and you can't prove you're protecting it. Proper asset categorization and a complete, accurate SSP are your foundation. We talked about external service providers and the complexity they add to your scope. Know what they handle. Get the CRM. Make sure the SSP reflects your actual responsibilities. We covered evidence, specifically the 2 tests every piece of evidence needs to pass, adequate and sufficient. And we walked through 3 real-world examples showing exactly what assessors look for and why. In the tips section, we covered the False Claims Act, which is the most important legal reality in this space right now, along with the SSP accuracy requirements, the difference between POAM and operational plan of actions, the customer responsibility matrix, enduring exceptions, and the resources you need to stay current. And we closed with something I'm seeing come up more and more in the field, AI tools in your CMMC environment. If an AI tool touches CUI, it's in scope. That's not a future problem, it's a now problem. Inventory your tools, update your SSP, and make sure your people can speak to it in an interview. Governance is a fix, not technology. If you only take 4 things from today, make it these. Know your CUI. Get your SSP right. Make sure your SPRS score is accurate and defensible. And know what AI tools are running in your environment. Before I open it up for questions, I want to tell you about one thing. If anything I covered today made you realize there are gaps in your preparation, whether it's your SSP, your asset categorization, your SPRS score, or your evidence documentation, Elevate can help. There are multiple ways to reach the perfect 110 score, and there is no one-size-fits-all for every organization. Your organization must properly plan for success since CMMC is not only an IT issue, it encompasses the entire organization. Organizations can choose different paths to compliance, such as utilizing government-approved enclaves, both dedicated and hybrid, as well as leveraging services from trusted managed services and external service providers. There will be several factors that will drive your compliance efforts, from cost to user experience, from complexity to accounting for the burden of the assessment, to isolating your environment to provide full security coverage. Different roads with different trade-offs, but ultimately getting you to the same destination of scoring 110 on your CMMC Level 2 certification. Here at Elevate, we build our practice around exactly this kind of work. We work with organizations across the defense industrial base, DIB, to assess their posture, identify gaps, build remediation plans, and help them get through the certification process with confidence. One more thing. If you're trying to figure out how AI tools in your environment affect your current CMMC posture, not the future framework, your posture today, that's one of the most common conversations we're having with clients right now. The inventory work, the SSP updates, the accessible use policies. We know exactly what to look for. Reach out and let's talk about before your next assessment. You can book a free CMMC readiness consultation directly on our website at elevateconsult.com. You can also download our CMMC compendium. This is a comprehensive resource that covers the full framework, and you can connect with me directly on LinkedIn. The link is on your screen. Don't let compliance be the thing that costs you a contract. All right, let's open it up. What questions do you have? There are a few that have come through. So the term enclave is used throughout this presentation. Can you provide more details on what an enclave is and what it isn't? Sure. So according to CMMC, an enclave is a set of system resources that operate within the same security domain and that share the protection of a single or common and continuous security perimeter. The segmentation of an organization's network or data that is intended to wall off that network or database from all other networks or systems. A CMMC assessment scope can be within the assessment scope of an enclave. So there's several MSPs or MSSPs that have developed an enclave to help their clients meet CMMC compliance requirements by establishing a system, sometimes utilizing government-approved cloud services, to segment the CUI environment. All right, so another question. What does a typical CMMC readiness and C3PAO assessment cost? And how much internal employee time should we expect? It depends. The CMMC assessments cost vary depending on multiple different factors. That can include size and complexity of an organization, as well as initial preparedness of an organization. So, for instance, we've seen CMMC readiness range from $30,000 to $120,000, and C3PO assessments costs ranging from maybe $35,000 to $100,000. Internal employee time also varies from a few hours per week to a dedicated project with several team members assigned full-time to prepare for an assessment ranging from 3 to 6 months. Recommendation is to validate your readiness and C3PO to ensure they provide a right fit for your organization, both in experience and versed in the tech stack your organization is currently using. All right, if only one department handles CUI, does your whole company need to be CMMC compliant? A CMMC boundary is determined by how CUI flows through the organization. The scope of the assessment could be limited to one department or the entire organization, depending on what CUI is handled or processed. By limiting the processing of CUI, an organization can isolate and segment only the department processing CUI versus an entire company. This is generally the best practice recommendation. It can also save money when utilizing enclave solutions that are priced per user. All right. Another question. Who are the appropriate people responsible for building and maintaining the system security plan within an organization? So every organization is different, but several people may be involved in building and or maintaining the system security plan. According to NIST SP 800-18, this is the guidance that indicates the Chief Information Security or Chief Information Officer is the official responsible for developing and maintaining an agency-wide information security program. The information system owner, also maybe known as the program manager, is responsible for overall procurement, development, integration, modification, operation, and maintenance of the information system. The information system owner is also responsible for developing and maintaining the system security plan in coordination with others. The information owner is responsible for the information and establishing the controls over the generation, collection, processing, dissemination, and disposal of this information. The information owner provides input to the information system owner regarding security requirements over the information system where the information resides. The Information System Security Officer is responsible for ensuring appropriate operational security posture is maintained. They'll assist in developing and updating the system security plan. The authorizing official finally will approve the system security plans. Now, One individual may be assigned multiple roles with an organization. You may entitle these roles differently, but special attention should be taken to ensure individuals working on the plan are not the ones approving the plan. This will ensure appropriate separation of duties are being maintained. All right, so it looks like we're running out of time. Thank you all for your time today. I hope this was useful. And generally, if you have questions after this session, don't hesitate to reach out. This is what we do every day, and we're happy to help. The recording of this webinar will be available on Elevate's YouTube channel. And we're also releasing 4 mini classes that go deeper on specific topics we covered today. CUI and scoping, what makes good evidence, SPRS scoring, and the False Claims Act, and the AI angle and the CMMC compliance. You'll be able to find all of them on our channel. Thanks again, and good luck with your certification.